He left me alone on our wedding night without a single explanation. At first, I thought maybe he just needed a moment, but then I heard something downstairs. Soft whispers, the sound of footsteps. And when I looked closer, I realized the truth was darker than anything I could have ever imagined. Before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that bell icon, and share your thoughts in the comments below, because you're not going to believe how this story ends. My name is Jasmine, and the night that was supposed to be the happiest of my life turned into something I still struggle to understand. Everything had seemed perfect. The ceremony, the laughter, the way everyone cheered as we danced. I had finally married David, the man who had been my best friend, my rock, my everything. We'd met 3 years ago at a charity event. He was charming, thoughtful, and the kind of man who made you feel like the only person in the world. My friends used to say I was lucky, and maybe I was. Or maybe I was blind. That night, after the guests left and the house grew quiet, I changed into my silk gown and waited in our honeymoon suite. The room was filled with soft candlelight, and I'd placed his favorite music on low volume. But the minutes turned into an hour, then 2. David never came upstairs. At first, I thought he might be with his friends, saying goodbye, helping clean up. Maybe something small had come up. But when I went downstairs, the entire house was dark. No voices, no movement, just silence. His car was still outside, though. Something felt off. You know when your heart starts racing but you can't explain why? That's exactly what I felt. The air suddenly felt heavy, like the walls were holding their breath with me. I called out, "David?" But there was no reply. Then I heard it. A faint sound, like footsteps, coming from the back of the house. My heart stopped for a moment. I walked slowly toward the noise, my bare feet brushing against the marble floor. The house, which once felt warm and inviting, now seemed enormous and cold. I passed the kitchen, and that's when I noticed the light in the study was still on. I hesitated, then quietly pushed the door open. The study was empty, but his phone was lying on the desk. Screen cracked. The wallpaper, our engagement photo, stared back at me. But there was something else that made me freeze. The laptop on the table was open, and a document was still displayed on the screen. It was a legal paper, something about a transfer of ownership. My name was on it, and so was his. But it wasn't a marriage document. It was a property transfer agreement, one that would give him full control over everything I owned once we were married. My hands trembled. My head started spinning. What was this? Why would he prepare something like this? And then, as I stood there trying to make sense of it, I heard that sound again. Only this time, it wasn't footsteps. It was a voice. A woman's voice. I froze, listening closely. It was coming from the back entrance. I couldn't make out all the words, but one sentence sent chills down my spine. "She doesn't know anything. By tomorrow, it'll all be done." That voice didn't belong to anyone from the wedding. I recognized it. It was Rachel, David's business partner, the one he always said was like a sister. I remember standing there completely paralyzed. My husband, the man that I had just married, was downstairs in the dark with another woman talking about something I didn't know. I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to tell myself there was an explanation, that maybe it was business, maybe I was overreacting. But then I heard her laugh. That same fake, flirty laugh I'd heard before when she'd touch his arm at dinners. And his voice followed. Calm, confident, and chilling. "Don't worry. Once she signs everything, we'll disappear." My heart shattered. I felt sick. Tears welled up, but I couldn't cry. I was too shocked. My mind raced. What did he mean by disappear? What was he planning? And then as I stood there trying to make sense of it, I heard that sound again. Only this time, it wasn't footsteps. It was footsteps. Louder this time. Then a knock. "Jasmine," his voice, calm, smooth. "You awake?" I didn't answer. My throat was too tight. "Babe," he said again, his tone shifting slightly, like he knew I was listening. "I just went out for some air. Are you okay?" I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I could hear him trying the handle, but it wouldn't open. After a few moments, the footsteps faded away. I barely slept that night. I sat on the bed, staring at the wedding dress draped over the chair, wondering how everything had turned so quickly into a nightmare. When morning came, he acted like nothing had happened. He smiled, kissed my forehead, and made me breakfast. But his phone never left his hand, and every time he looked at me, it wasn't love in his eyes anymore. It was calculation. Over the next few days, strange things started happening. Bank notifications I didn't recognize, papers I didn't remember signing. I tried asking him about them, but he always had an excuse. "Just routine stuff," he'd say, brushing it off with a smile. Then one evening, while he was showering, I took his phone. I didn't even know what I was looking for. But what I found made my blood run cold. Text messages between him and Rachel, dozens of them, and one in particular that broke me completely. "Once she's out of the picture," it read, "we'll have everything." Everything. My home, my savings, even the inheritance my late grandmother had left me. All of it was tied to my name, and once I was legally bound to him, he could take it. I realized then that the man I'd married wasn't the man I'd fallen in love with. He was a stranger, a liar. And worse, he was dangerous. That night, I made a decision that changed everything. When he came out of the shower and smiled at me, I smiled back, pretended everything was fine. I even kissed him goodnight and told him I loved him. But as soon as he fell asleep, I quietly packed a bag, grabbed the documents I'd found, and slipped out of the house. The moment the door clicked behind me, I knew there was no turning back. But what I didn't know yet, what I couldn't have imagined, was that the story wasn't over. Because the next morning, when I went to the lawyer's office to show them the documents, I discovered something that made everything even darker. The name on the papers wasn't just his. It was my father's, too. And that's when I realized the betrayal ran deeper than I ever imagined. The next morning, I woke up in a small guest house an hour outside the city. My head was pounding from lack of sleep, and my heart felt heavy, like I'd aged years overnight. I sat on the bed, staring at the morning light pouring through the window, still wearing the same white nightgown I had fled in. The memory of last night haunted me. The whispers, the laughter, the sound of David's voice saying they'd disappear. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear Rachel's laugh echoing through my head. I had to find out what was happening. I couldn't just run and hide. If David had really tried to take everything from me, I needed proof. I needed the truth. So, after splashing cold water on my face, I called the only person I trusted completely, my mother's old lawyer, Mr. Collins. He'd handled my grandmother's estate and helped transfer everything into my name years ago. If anyone could help me, it was him. When he picked up, I didn't even know how to start. My voice trembled as I said, "Mr. Collins, I think my husband is trying to steal everything I own." There was silence on the other end for a moment before he replied, "Come to my office, Jessamine. Bring everything you have." So I did. I grabbed the folder I'd snatched from David's study, including the property transfer papers, and took the first taxi I could find. When I arrived, Mr. Collins looked up from his desk with concern. He was in his 60s, always calm and collected, but when he saw my pale face, his expression changed immediately. "Sit down, Jessamine," he said gently. "Tell me everything." For the next hour, I told him everything about the wedding night, the voices, the papers, and the messages I'd found on David's phone. He listened quietly, occasionally jotting something down. When I was done, he leaned back and exhaled deeply. "Jessamine," he said slowly, "I need you to understand something. These documents you found, they're not just property transfer forms. They're part of a legal setup designed to shift ownership of all your assets into a joint trust. But here's the part that concerns me most. There's a third party involved. Your father." My stomach dropped. "My father? That's impossible. He doesn't even speak to me anymore." He slid the papers across the desk and pointed to the bottom of one page. "That's his signature, right there." I stared at the signature, my breath catching in my throat. It looked just like his. The same slanted letters, the same loops. My father, who cut me off 3 years ago after I refused to join his company. My father who told me marrying David was a mistake. "Why would he be part of this?" I whispered, more to myself than him. Mr. Collins shook his head. "I don't know yet, Jessamine, but if this is genuine, it means he's somehow connected to David in a way you didn't know. Jessamine, this could be bigger than a simple betrayal. It might involve your family's wealth, your grandmother's estate, everything." My hands started trembling again. I had no words. My mind replayed every conversation I'd had with my father before we stopped talking. He'd always warned me not to trust anyone with money. "People will smile at you until they see what you have," he'd said once. I thought it was just bitterness. But now, maybe he'd known something I didn't. "Can you verify if the signature is real?" I asked. He nodded. "I'll have it analyzed immediately, but Jessamine, I need you to be careful. Don't go home. Don't contact David. If what you're saying is true, he may already know you found the documents." I promised him I wouldn't, but deep down, I was terrified. Because Mr. Collins was right. David wasn't the kind of man who would simply let me walk away. After I left his office, I found a quiet cafe nearby to sit and think. I ordered coffee, though my stomach churned too much to drink it. I stared at my phone, seeing dozens of missed calls and messages from David. "Where are you? I'm worried. Please call me. You're overreacting. Let's talk. Jessamine, don't make me come find you." That last one made me go cold. I quickly turned off my phone and slipped it into my bag. I didn't know where to go, so I decided to visit someone I hadn't spoken to in months, my childhood friend, Harper. She was one of the few people who'd never liked David. When she opened the door and saw my face, she didn't even ask questions. She just pulled me into a hug and said, "What did he do?" We sat in her living room as I told her everything. When I showed her the papers and the texts, she looked furious. "I knew something was off about that man," she said, pacing the floor. "He always smiled too perfectly, always had an excuse for everything. I told you he was too smooth." I managed a weak smile. "I know, you were right." She sighed and handed me a blanket. "You can stay here as long as you need to. But you need to protect yourself, Jessamine. If your dad's name is on those papers, this isn't just about David. This is about power, money, control." She was right. I could feel it too. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was something planned, something deliberate. That night, while Harper was asleep, I sat by the window and looked out at the city lights. My reflection in the glass didn't look like me anymore. My wedding ring still glittered on my finger, but it felt like a lie. Everything about my life suddenly felt like a lie. Then, around 2 a.m., Harper's phone buzzed. She'd fallen asleep on the couch, so I picked it up to turn it off, but then I froze when I saw the notification. It was a text message from an unknown number, and it said, "Tell Jasmine she can't hide forever." I stared at it, heart pounding. How did they even know I was here? I hadn't told anyone where I'd gone. Not even Mr. Collins knew I'd come to Harper's. My hands were shaking so badly that I dropped the phone. I woke Harper immediately and she called the police. They came, took a report, and told us to stay inside. But the entire night, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us. The next morning, Mr. Collins called. "Jasmine, I need you to come to the office right away," he said, his voice sounding tense. When I arrived, he looked like he hadn't slept either. He handed me a printed sheet and said, "The handwriting analyst confirmed it. The signature on those documents, it's authentic. Your father signed them." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "So what does that mean?" I whispered. "It means your father and David are working together," he said grimly. "And based on what I found in their financial records, they've been planning this for months, maybe longer." He showed me the evidence, emails, transfers, and legal filings that had started even before the wedding. David's company and my father's had merged quietly under a new name. My inheritance, my estate, even my grandmother's trust were being funneled into joint accounts under their control. All this time, my marriage had been nothing but a business deal. I sat there staring blankly at the papers. My voice cracked as I said, "He used me." Mr. Collins nodded sadly. Yes, and he wasn't alone. My father's words echoed in my mind. People will smile at you until they see what you have. Now I understood. He hadn't been warning me about others. He had been warning me about himself. Tears streamed down my face as I whispered, "He didn't just take my trust. He took my trust in everything." Mr. Collins placed a hand on my shoulder. "Jasmine, we can fight this, but you need to stay hidden. Until I can get a court order, they must believe you're still confused or unaware." I nodded through the tears. My life had been shattered, but deep down, something inside me hardened. I wasn't going to run anymore. Not from David. Not from my father. If they wanted to take everything from me, they were about to find out I wasn't as weak as they thought. Because I had proof. And soon, everyone else would too. When David was taken away that night, I thought the storm had finally passed. I sat in my car for hours outside the house, watching the flashing blue lights fade in the distance, feeling both broken and strangely light. The man who had once sworn eternal love to me was now facing charges of fraud and forgery. But deep inside, there was still one wound left open. My father. I needed answers. Not revenge this time, just the truth. The next morning, I called my father's office. His secretary told me he was at home, resting. I almost laughed at the irony. He was resting while my entire world had been shattered because of his choices. Still, I drove there anyway. When I walked into his grand home, he looked surprised to see me. "Jasmine," he said, standing up slowly. "I was just about to call you." I crossed my arms. "Really? To explain why you've been stealing from your own daughter?" He winced, rubbing his temples. "It's not what you think." I laughed bitterly. Every guilty person says that. "Sit down, please," he said quietly. I didn't move. "No, you're going to stand there and tell me the truth. Why did you help David take everything I owned? Was it greed? Was it hatred for Mom? What did I ever do to deserve this?" He took a deep breath, his face pale. "Jasmine, it started with debt." That single word made my chest tighten. He explained that years ago, before Mom passed, he had made some bad investments. His company nearly collapsed, and he borrowed money from dangerous investors to keep everything afloat. By the time he met David, he was desperate. David had found out about the debts and used them as leverage. David promised he'd fix everything, my father said, his voice cracking. He said he loved you, that he wanted to build a future with you, and that if I helped him transfer your assets temporarily, he'd return them once the company was safe. My eyes burned with tears. So you traded me for your business? He shook his head. No, I thought I was protecting you. I was wrong. God, Jasmine, I was so wrong. There was guilt in his eyes. Deep, heavy guilt. But I couldn't find forgiveness just yet. You didn't just fail me, Dad. You chose him over me. You stood beside the man who tried to destroy me. He lowered his gaze, silent. For the first time in my life, my father looked small, like a man crushed by the weight of his own decisions. I'm ready to confess everything to the authorities. I already spoke with Mr. Collins. I'll testify against David and accept whatever punishment I deserve. Those words stunned me. I didn't expect him to surrender that easily. He looked at me again, eyes glassy. Jasmine, I can't undo what I did, but I can make sure he never hurts you or anyone else again. Tears rolled down my cheeks. For a long time, I said nothing. Part of me wanted to scream, to hate him forever. But another part, the part that still remembered him as the man who held me after Mom's funeral, couldn't. Then do it, I said quietly. Make it right. And he did. The weeks that followed were a blur of court hearings and headlines. The media loved the story. Wealthy couple exposed in fraud scandal. Husband and father betray heiress. Love turned into lies. But I stayed silent. I refused interviews, turned down offers, and let the evidence speak for itself. David's confident smirk vanished the day he saw the court footage of his own confession, the recording from my bracelet. He tried to argue that it was manipulated, but the forensic experts confirmed its authenticity. Combined with my father's testimony and Mia's emails, which the police later recovered, it was more than enough. David was sentenced to prison. Mia was fined and banned from corporate work. My father received a reduced sentence for his cooperation, and the court ordered restitution of every asset stolen from me. It took months, but justice finally came, quietly, without any grand revenge. I moved back into my own home, but everything felt different. The walls that once echoed with laughter now carried memories of deception. So I made a decision. I sold the house. I didn't want a monument to pain. I wanted a new beginning. One evening, as I was packing the last box, I found something buried in the drawer of my nightstand. A letter, in David's handwriting. It wasn't signed, but I knew it was from him. Jasmine, if you're reading this, it means you finally won. Maybe you think that makes you stronger. Maybe it does. But remember this. I only played the game you created. You wanted perfection, and I gave you the illusion of it. The truth is, we were both acting. You just played your part better. I stared at the letter for a long time, then tore it into tiny pieces. His words didn't hurt anymore. They just sounded like the last whisper of a man who had already lost. A few months later, my father was released on probation. He came to see me one afternoon, standing awkwardly by the garden gate like he wasn't sure if he was allowed in. "I didn't know if you'd want to see me," he said softly. I smiled faintly. "You're still my dad. I don't hate you. But I can't forget. Not yet." He nodded. "That's fair." Then he looked at me with watery eyes. "You remind me of your mother. Strong and forgiving." That night, as the sun set over the city, I sat on the balcony of my new apartment. The sky was painted with gold and pink hues, and for the first time in a long while, I felt peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had survived the imperfection. I'd been lied to, used, and betrayed, but I didn't let it define me. I rebuilt myself, stronger, wiser, and unafraid. So when people ask me what happened on my wedding night, I tell them this. He left me alone, but in that silence, I found my truth. And sometimes losing everything is exactly what you need to find yourself again.